almost half of the problems that led to inflation started in the rest of the world. Things like war made the world more expensive, energy in particular. The rest of it was what we did in Australia, and indeed much of the world did during COVID. We gave people a bunch of money, but we made it hard for them to spend it. And so when they finally could spend it, we ended up with a classic formula for inflation, or too much money chasing too little stuff.
So what has federal government spending been as a percentage of GDP since Anthony Albanese came to power in May of 2022? And how does that compare with the previous decade?
So we're currently spending 27.5% of national income. That's the government's estimate for this financial year. It's hard to make a direct apples with apples comparison with the last coalition year because it had some COVID costs in it. If you take those out, spending today probably has gone up. It was probably 24.5% in that last coalition year. So it's gone up about 3% as a share of the economy. That's the rough equivalent of about $80 billion.
And so this point is going to be debated over the coming months. Could the Albanese government have chosen to lower spending in the last 2 years and interest rates would have come down sooner?
Yeah, look, that's my view. In a recession, governments can do a lot of good with extra spending. But when you're outside of a recession, that's harder to achieve, and particularly when there's inflation. Inflation is your classic trade-off economy. If you have more of something, you tend to end up with less of something else. So what we got with the increase in government spending was a different economy. There are a whole bunch of people who benefited from that government spending in a cost of living crisis. But there were people who probably were on the wrong side of that too. It probably did keep interest rates higher for longer.
So by how much could the government have cut spending but still kept the economy out of recession?
Really tricky question. And partly it is because of that trade-off. Again, if they'd spent less, we'd have had lower interest rates, which would have let borrowers spend a bit more. So the key is not really recession or not. In fact, I don't think recession's a great measure, and the key thing there was probably we got a lot of migrants, and a lot of migrants meant more people. That kept us out of recession. The key is our standard of living, which has taken a hit, but it's stabilised and it's starting to come up. And my view would be you'll see a gradual improvement through this year and next year as well.
And so in what areas do you suggest Labor could have cut spending? Because the PM says there have been significant and important investments over the past couple of years in areas like the NDIS and Veterans Affairs.
And those two are great examples. And in fact, Ross Gittins just wrote a great article pointing out that it's easier to talk about cutting government spending than to actually do it. So Veterans Affairs is the best example because the last government underfunded it. There weren't enough public servants, and so the veterans weren't getting the money that they deserved. So clearly that's something where we did need to spend more. NDIS is a bit more complicated. We're now spending a lot more. It's not clear we're spending it quite as effectively as the original purpose of that scheme laid out. So an example, we have right now more than 1 in every 8 young boys in Australia. Those aged 5 to 7 are on the NDIS. That wasn't kind of part of the original plan. So, there's the potential for some savings. The bigger savings, though, are in other areas. There's a dodgy deal that allows Western Australia to get a much larger chunk of the GST than it would otherwise have done. Or our electricity subsidies. People might love them, but if instead you were getting lower interest rates, there's a trade-off. $3.5 billion a year in electricity subsidies is effectively subsidies for fossil fuel.
So what do you make of the government's argument that through the last couple of years it was support, took the choice, it was a choice to support, and it thought it was important to support the jobs market and economic growth in the process?
They're very right about jobs, and jobs has been the standout success of the Australian economy in recent times, notably through this government. And a part of it was their spending. Their spending was in areas that generated a lot of government jobs, which have been the standout success. It's a more mixed bag if you're saying the economy. We got a different economy rather than a better economy. We got one. Where people got cheaper electricity, they got cheaper childcare. There were more fee-free TAFE places. There were better wages for people in aged care and childcare. The government spending did do a lot of things, but the alternative probably would have been lower interest rates and more money in the pockets of the mortgage belt.
Yeah, and so how do you rate the government's overall strategy through this and the choice it made?
So it's worth pointing out to people that there is no magic wand to make a cost of living crisis go away. If there was, this government would have been waving it, past governments would have been waving it, governments all around the world would be waving it. Governments are better at saying they're doing something around a cost of living crisis than actually doing something because it's so hard to do. What governments can do, and what this government did do, was move the pain around. You look at the list of people who are better off, those various things that I mentioned a moment ago. That extra government spending has a whole bunch of beneficiaries, but it's also, there were people on the wrong side of the extra government spending, and perhaps most notably borrowers. So lots of people better off, lots of people worse off. What is clear is that they did what was politically necessary. It would have been hard to do something different. A lot of people feeling a lot of pain and wanted their government to do something, and the government has. It has shifted what we do in the Australian economy fairly notably.
And so, Chris Richardson, can I push you a little further on that at all? Do you think it made the right call or not?
I think the politics have been better than the economics, but that's not a surprise. All right, they're politicians, and they're going to tend to make the political choice. If we'd fought inflation harder and faster, we would have our government would have cut spending and raised taxes, and that would have been political suicide. Instead, they've raised spending and they've cut taxes, and that is what most governments have done in the face of this.
Yeah, but incumbent governments around the world have been really struggling through this.
They have, and it's not a surprise. If you think of, the likes of our Reserve Bank and its equivalent around the world fighting inflation for the first time in decades, and they deliberately have tried not to cause too much pain in unemployment as they fight inflation. And they've been, by and large, relatively successful compared to what we've seen in the past. The flip side of that, though, is it's a slower fight against inflation, and a slower fight against inflation is one in which your wages tend to fall a bit further behind prices, and interest rates stay higher for longer, and lots of Australians have borrowed a lot, and inflation is a tax. It takes money from families and gives it to the government. So the economics of what you've seen around the world has been sensible enough. We have done better this time at protecting unemployment. It hasn't gone up as much as previously, but we've had more losers. Wage earners have lost out, borrowers have lost out, taxpayers have lost out, and there's lots of them. So even if the economics of what you've seen around the world has been good, the politics have been bad, and lots of governments have been wearing the pain of that.
Yeah.